Hello, BookTube. You know, there are certain days when the only surefire cure-all is a mail haul. I'm sure you'll agree. And today, for me, has been one of those days. Non-stop gloom in terms of weather. Non-stop gloom in terms of the real world, the outside world, the few times I've been unwise enough to check on it. And non-stop work. Non-stop of the phenomenon that I described yesterday, where the world is impinging on my little bubble in a way that it usually doesn't. So this is the first chance that I've had all day to make a video and talk to my lame-ass BookTube friends. This is unacceptable. I thought I'd be able to make a few today, but no, it looks like it's going to continue for a couple more days. The bad news is I won't be venting to you on camera as often as usual. The good news is I will, at the end of it, be financed until August, which is a nice feeling. But I didn't want to just disappear, so I thought we'd do a mail haul and see if we can just smooth our way through. We don't want to import trouble here. We'll just smooth our way through and see what we have here. Oh, and I should probably mention, it's been sorry for the shaky cam. The MacBook is on a stack of pillows, and that's what's causing it to shake. I should mention here that I've something that I haven't mentioned in a while, which is a usual disclaimer for these mail hauls. If I hold up a book that gets all your engines firing, you see something and it's absolutely something that you want, not that you're partially curious about, not you read a book 20 years ago and it kind of sort of interests me, don't really remember its name, or not, still my favorite. Yeah, if I saw it on the ground, I'd probably pick it up. so you can put it in a package, walk to the post office and spend money to mail it to me. No, but if you see something that you really want, be sure to let me know. Because once I've done my duty by these things, by reading and reviewing them, I'm almost certainly not going to keep them, very few of them. So I'd be happy to add you to my near-infinite BookTube mailing list and send it to you when I'm done with it. Let's see what this first one is. Finished copy of something. Okay, this is Bloomsbury. It comes out in January. Not anything I requested. It's Crisis Leadership. How to Lead in Times of Crisis, Threat, and Uncertainty by Tim Johnson. And it looks like it's just that. It's just a crisis leadership manual. So for the business world, no matter what it says about times of crisis and uncertainty, it means times of crisis and uncertainty when you're the a-hole in charge of other a-holes in a business world setting. So I don't know exactly where this comes from. I don't think I would ever... Yeah, anyone in a leadership position is only too aware that we live in uncertain times. Yeah, see? The condescension's built right into the first line. All of us are aware of that. Not just leaders. not just the current Americanism of that the leader in an organization is the adult in the organization. They're the only ones that actually know anything. And when they tell you something, they get to do it with a lathered-on paternalism that comes from that. I'm in this position not because I'm willing to grind it out for 17 hours a day with no appreciation from the a-hole above me, but rather because I'm wise enough to be in this position. I know more than you do. So the people in leadership positions are only too aware that we live in uncertain times. But the rest of you, the sheeple that work for me, they just need to be told things. And in the business world alone, now that effective parenting has taken over in most of the Western world, the business world is now the only place in the world where you will still hear decisions routinely justified by "because I said so." Disaster can strike any business at any time and usually without warning, but disaster there means losing money. I guarantee you disaster there does not mean bankrupting the pension plans of the employees. That's not disaster. Outright, blatantly lying to your employees about their benefits, their work expectations, that's not a disaster. The loss of character and integrity, that's not a disaster. It just means money. And usually without warning. Public institutions, too, face a range of threats, from global recession and resurgent terrorism to a stream of appalling natural disasters. For leaders in such organizations, these crisis situations can present both opportunities and, of course, threats. Yeah, I don't know that I'll be reading this book. I don't know that I'll be reading this book. It seems much more pitched to the kind of a-hole that views a natural disaster as an opportunity. So we're just going to move on. That was a rocky start. let's move on to. Okay, all right. This will probably be a little easier. This is also a January book, I think. Yeah, this is a novel. It's The Immortalist by Chloe Benjamin in the finished copy. I have had the advanced copy for a while and haven't got to it. I think we saw this before. If you knew the date of your death, how would you live your life? It's 1969 in New York City's Lower East Side, and word has spread of the arrival of a traveling psychic who claims to be able to tell anyone the day they will die. In search of one thing they can know for sure, the Gold Children, 4 adolescents on the cusp of self-awareness, sneak out to hear their fortunes. I gotta confess, the gimmick put me off. I put me off reading it. I shouldn't hold the gimmick against it. I should get right to it, because this is going to be viewed everywhere. Everybody's going to talk about this thing, and I'm not going to be part of that conversation. But I still want to know. I want to know what people are talking about. It seems to me like the kind of soft science fiction gimmick that people who never read science fiction, authors who never read science fiction, love to indulge in. They pick that one thing. Hey, what about if 20 years from now there were no men anymore? Or, hey, what if people suddenly had signs hanging over their heads? Because I've got one particular point to make about my ex-boyfriend, and I need a device that will allow me to do that in the context of a novel without being litigatable. So I'm going to come up with this one thing, and I'm going to call it science fiction. If it can work for Margaret Atwood, it can work for me. When the whole point of science fiction is that you come up with that one thing and then you build a world around it. You fit it into a world so that a reader who reads science fiction, which you are nominally claiming to write, can come to that story and not ask the questions they ask of absolute flat-footed neophyte science fiction authors, where we read a neophyte science fiction or fantasy author their very first try. The thing you're going to bark your shin on right away is bad world building. And you expect they'll get better at it. It's a tricky thing to do. But literary fiction, science fiction authors, they don't ever have to do that. They come up with one thing. So let's say every time you're mean to somebody, a new scar happens on your body. Well, okay. But have you thought anything about that out, other than that one thing? Anything? No, you have not. Because the only thing you have in mind is the concluding scene where a scar removes, where a scar vanishes. That's the only thing you're thinking about. So you don't really care about any of the rest of it. What would happen in the world if that happened is not a question you have ever asked. And the same thing is true. I don't know. We'll see. The premise of this made me leery because it strikes me as just the sort of thing where a traveling guy coming to town who can tell you the date when you die is all the author thought. When in reality, the first time that happened and proved to be true, the world would change completely. And I would be willing to bet that it would change in ways that would make this story impossible. But anyway, I will see. Because I will read the book. As soon as the new year happens, I will read the book, and then we'll know. I think it's safe to say that our rocky start has continued. So let's continue and see if we can't claw our way out of this little black hole. Oh, great. Okay, all right. There we go. Great. Okay, so we move instantly away from the world of invented bull hockey to a book we've seen before that struck me as very intriguing and favorable when we first saw it, and now I've got the finished copy. This doesn't come out until the new year, though, right? Right? Yes, it comes out in the new year. This is I Remain Yours, a study of Civil War era letter writing. We saw this in the spring, I think, when I got this original one. And now we've got the finished copy, and of course, in the interval since then, I think in the interval since I first saw this, when I was talking about the charm of letters in the American Civil War, the letter writing in the American Civil War, that was immortalized by Ken Burns in his documentary, The Civil War, which, if any of you are out there and you haven't seen Ken Burns' The Civil War, Ken Burns' The Civil War and David Attenborough's Planet Earth. Okay? All right, do I really need to stress more than that? Honestly. Okay? All right. So I'm assuming that all of you have seen those two things and marveled at them, and that you saw and marveled at both of those two things before you watched even a single minute of Stranger Things. And if you haven't, see that you do. Okay? But Civil War era letter writing was immortalized by Ken Burns as a Civil War because a lot of letters were read by celebrities during that documentary. But it got an extra boost from me this summer when a whole bunch of people on Twitter and Instagram and even YouTube did montages of Civil War reenactors and alt-right cosplayers in Charlottesville and elsewhere set to copper-plated Civil War style letters. There's one in particular, the image is not something I can describe on a family channel, but it was hilarious. Because there's a certain hand gesture that when you are particularly upset, it really helps to do it with both hands at the same time. I wish I could link to it, but I'm not going to do that on this channel. So, that adds. I will be smiling through. I guess I haven't actually read this. I will be smiling through parts of it because of that. Well, let's move on. We've got this big thing here, and it's big and it's thin. We'll see what it is here. Gosh, how nice it would be if it was a graphic novel. I never get graphic novels. Okay. All right. This is coming out in March. I don't know it. It's called The Fighter. That is a very nice cover. Must be a designer from the UK. It's a blistering novel of violence and deliverance set against the mythic backdrop of the Mississippi Delta. Acres and acres of fertile soil, the 200-year-old antebellum house, all gone. And so is the woman who gave it to Jack, the foster mother only days away from dying, her mind eroded by dementia and family legacy she entrusted to Jack, now owned by banks and strangers. And Jack's mind begins to fail too. The decades of bare-knuckle fighting are now taking its toll, as concussion after concussion forces him to carry around a stash of illegal painkillers and a notebook of names that separate friend from foe. But in a single twisted night, he is derailed. Hijacked by a sleazy gambler out to settle a score, Jack loses the money that will clear his debt with Big Mama Sweet, the queen of Delta Vice, whose deep backwoods playground offers sin to all those willing to pay. This same chain of events introduces an unlikely savior in the form of a sultry, tattooed carnival worker. Guided by what she calls her, quote, Church of Coincidence, Annette pushes Jack toward redemption in her own free-spirited way, only to discover that the world of Big Mama Sweet is filled with savage danger. Okay, well that sounds kind of intriguing. Ordinarily, I have, if you watch my 80 million videos, you know, ordinarily I have kind of a short temper with what I refer to as hicklit, where the sanctification of the characters, the 80% of the weight that the author is supposed to be producing, the author is just assuming comes from the fact that you are granting those characters that weight and that authenticity because they're uneducated and grew up in a bayou or a holler or a dirt farm. And there's an element of that that's unbelievably condescending. It invariably comes from people who maybe spent 5 minutes as a child in such an area and then went to Ivy League schools and grew up in upper middle class Connecticut suburbs. That drives me nuts. There's almost in almost every case, it's just layered with condescension. That, you know, it's no different. It is the 21st century equivalent of James Fenimore Cooper's Noble Savage, an idea that was mocked even in its own day and has continued to be mocked ever since. And here it happens in broad daylight, under the eyes and nose of every book critic in the world, and they usually give it a pass, and it drives me nuts. That, you know, if you wear a dirty white tank top and you live in a trailer park with your mother, and you haven't held a job in your whole life, and you're 23 and you deal meth on the side, I'm supposed to suddenly think you're real as a character, with real in italics. Drives me nuts. It's your job to make your characters real, not the setting's job. and not their demographics job. That drives me nuts. And Hicklet is guilty of that more than almost any other kind. Okay, I was going to say more than almost any other kind of modern contemporary fiction, but of course that's not true anymore. Now, immigration fiction is by far the most guilty of it. Immigrant fiction, Beasts of No Nation fiction, is by far the most guilty of it. Now, all you need to do, as a friend of mine in the publishing industry said, if we get a query letter and it has the word Nigeria anywhere in it, not just the setting of the book or where you come from, anywhere, if you mention the word Nigeria, we'll send you a contract. We don't need to know anything else. And the books largely reflect that. Okay, here's a family drama. It's obviously my own story. I've only lightly sprinkled it with a little fiction. You can still peg everybody on my Facebook page to my novel. But you can't criticize it because, you know, I came here in a shipping container, or my father died at the hands of a militia, or something like that. That also drives me nuts. And that is now the leading contender for, I don't even know what you'd call that. I'll come up with a name for it. I'll have to. But that has taken the crown from Hicklet in terms of authors assuming that the stuff they import will do the work on the page and that they don't need to do it. And since that's an abrogation of storytelling, it drives me nuts. And the fact that it is venerated on bended knee. If you come from Gambia and you write a novel about how hard it is to come from Gambia, the New York Times will review it. Plain and simple, flat fact. Doesn't matter how bad it is. Doesn't matter how bad your representation is. Doesn't matter how crappy the provenance or the plot is. They will review it. You will get a New York Times review for your book. It's own voices, of course, absolutely possessing the literary scene, where a book's editor gets a book about Gambia, and the first thing the book's editor does is not read the first 30 pages to see if the prose is any good, but Google the author to see if they're from Gambia. And that changes things, and it shouldn't. Oh, God. This has just stayed rocky, hasn't it? All right, we're going to pull this out. We have 3 cardboard containers, and then we're done. This has been an extra ranty thing, I guess, because I've missed you. But we're going to pull this out because, you know, too much vinegar can ruin a meal. So these last 3 are going to be the bluebirds on Snow White's finger. You just wait and see. They will be. So let's see what this next one is. Okay. This simply cannot be true. This coincidence would just be mind-boggling. I refuse to believe it. This is something I don't know. I didn't request it. It's called Woman of the Ashes by Mia Couto. And it simply cannot be what I was just talking about, or I'm going to plot. This is the first in a trilogy about the last emperor of southern Mozambique by one of Africa's most important writers, who was born in Mozambique. Oh my. Oh. Okay. All right. This is the first in a trilogy about the last emperor of southern Mozambique by one of Africa's most important writers who was born in Mozambique. Okay. Southern Mozambique, 1894. So it's a historical novel. Part of it is anyway. Sergeant Germano de Mello is posted to the village of Nicolani to oversee the Portuguese conquest of territory claimed by the last of the leaders of the state of Gaza, the second largest empire led by an African. Alternating between the voices of a 15-year-old girl who is Germano's interpreter and Germano himself, Mia Couto's Woman of the Ashes combines vivid folkloric prose with extensive historical research to give a spellbinding and unsettling account of war-torn Mozambique at the end of the 19th century. Okay. All right, so this comes out in April. Okay. All right, I can already see a dozen for-money fiction reviewers in the American press, various parts of the American press, whether it's Men's Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post, quietly Googling Mozambique. I guarantee you they've never been there and couldn't find it on a map. But this was a finalist for the first Man Booker International Prize. And I don't think I'll be reviewing it. We shall see. It could be. Anyway, now we'll do the cardboard. Let's see what we have here. We'll try not to bounce the camera too much. There hasn't really been a Steve book so far. Okay. All right. I didn't request this. It looks kind of nice. This is by Steve Kavanaugh, and it's called The Plea. There's a skyscraper behind the title. Okay. Con artist turned lawyer Eddie Flynn is back. Oh no, I missed an Eddie Flynn story. I've never met him before. When David Child, a major client of a corrupt New York law firm, is arrested for murder, the FBI needs Eddie Flynn to get David to testify against the firm. They swear David is guilty as hell, and if Eddie can't or won't get David to turn, the FBI will send Eddie's wife to jail. And the downside? I'd pay the FBI to send Deb to jail. Again. The evidence overwhelmingly says that David killed his girlfriend, but even with the FBI putting pressure on him to secure his client's guilty plea, Eddie is convinced David didn't do it, and Eddie thinks he can prove it. With dangerous adversaries threatening, Eddie has to find a way to show David is innocent, keep his wife out of danger, and stay one step ahead of everyone. Okay, I kind of like the sound of that. Sounds like a legal thriller with a little extra oomph to it, and that sounds nice. Okay, so that is The Plea by Steve Kavanaugh, and then we have one more thing here, and we'll be done. What do we got for time here? I don't even know. Well, we're almost done. So, and it's our only video today because I have a mountain of work to do. Just a mountain of work to do. Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. All right, this one I requested. Like the cut of its jib. This is due in May, and it is Chosen Country, A Rebellion in the West by James Pogue. Some of you, if you're in America and you follow the American news from a couple of years ago, you'll recognize a picture on the cover there. An infamous and shameful episode in the news that came and went. And I wonder if this will be about that. Yes, it is. Okay, in a remote corner of Oregon, James Pogue found himself at the heart of a rebellion. Granted unmatched access to Ammon Bundy by Ammon Bundy to the armed occupation of the Mallard National Wildlife Refuge, Pogue met ranchers and militiamen ready to die fighting the federal government. He witnessed the fallout of communities riven by politics and the danger and allure of uncompromising religious belief. The occupation ended in the shooting death of one rancher, the imprisonment of dozens more, and a firestorm over the role of government that engulfed national headlines. In a raw and restless narrative that roams the same wild terrain as his literary forebears Edward Abbey and Hunter S. Thompson, Pogue examines the underpinnings of this rural uprising and struggles to reconcile diverging ideas of freedom, tracing a cultural fault line that spans the nation. These ranchers took over a federal installation, and the toll there, one dead rancher and dozens more in prison, sounds a little more dire than what really happened. And the point that was raised at the time in the news over and over again by editorialists was what would have happened if those ranchers had instead been black protesters. And of course the answer is obvious. They'd all have been dead. They'd have been killed on the spot, and their bodies would have been burned and then buried. And it would all have been done on camera, and 70% of the country would have agreed. But because these guys rode their horses like John Wayne and carried flags, there was a standoff for a long time when there wouldn't have been a standoff if they... I have been waiting since then for someone to write a book about that whole incident, and this is it. This is that book. And James Pogue, he's very young. He looks younger than any piece of clothing I'm wearing at the moment. But he's written for The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, Granta, The New Republic, and Vice. Well, la-di frickin' da. So he must be really talented, really, because you know, I know the rumor is that it's all about who you know, but you don't get into a line of things like that unless you know how to put a piece together. His work has been anthologized in N+1's City by City. He lives in New Mexico, and this is his first book. Oh, wow. This is his first book. Good for him. All right, so this comes out in May as a $28 hardcover. Okay. All right, so Chosen Country, that will probably be the first of these that I read, I have to admit. I know that's very predictable because it's nonfiction, but it will probably be the first one that I read. I'm fascinated in it. But I won't be reading any of these before 2018, which is kind of weird. I'm going to inventory them, and they're just going to go up on a shelf. So we've got Chosen Country. We've got The Plea. We have Woman of the Ashes, about Mozambique. We have The Fighter. We have I Remain Yours. We have The Immortalist by Chloe Benjamin in finished hardcover. And we have Crisis Leadership. And that is our somewhat varied mail haul for today. And that's going to have to be it. And I have dire ideas about tomorrow. I don't know if I'll be able to make a video at all tomorrow. I'll try. I'll try, because I have a whole bunch of them stacked up now. God help us. I feel like a normal booktuber. I swear, it's only because of work. It's not because I'm having a creative crisis or anything like that. It's just because I've got a lot of stuff to do, a lot of reading and research to do before I can start writing and make it all look easy. so I'm gonna get back to that now, and I will hope to make a video tomorrow, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.